Welcome to CharityVillage Connects. Today we're speaking to Elisa Birnbaum. Elisa is the co-founder, publisher, and editor-in-chief of Sea Change magazine, covering stories of social entrepreneurs, and is the host of its related podcast. Elisa is also the author of the book In the Business of Change, in which she profiles social entrepreneurs around the world and the lessons learned. Welcome, Elisa.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. Maybe we could start at the beginning. Some of our listeners won't really understand the nuances of some of the things that we're talking about when we're describing alternative revenue accessible to nonprofits and charities. So maybe you could start by defining what the landscape is in Canada and also maybe give us a better understanding of what social enterprise and impact investing is so that our audience can better understand and get familiar with these terms.
Well, that would take about 5 hours of our day right now. There's a lot going on there in those questions, but, so when it comes to alternative revenues, and you mentioned I do focus mostly on this field of social entrepreneurship, but the truth is, and I know we're talking and we should talk about definitions in a second, but we'll take that step afterwards, right? But the reason I say that is because it depends on who you're talking to in terms of who has what alternate revenues in their back pocket or can leverage or try to anyway. But from what I understand, we're focusing obviously on charities, nonprofits. There's not much that they have grants, they have loans sometimes, they have philanthropy and money. They can do all kinds of creative things like crowdsourcing and crowdfunding, which has become more and more popular. They can create, sponsor type of events and that type of thing where they work with corporations or otherwise or other nonprofits. Social entrepreneurship, social enterprise specifically has come into play for a lot of these organizations who are looking for, and that's the reason I focus more on them because it's sort of I feel like a lot of the other stuff has dried up, government grants and others. Not that they're not there, and they are. Over the years, I've noticed they've just become less and less in terms of what's available, and everyone's sort of competing for the same funds, and so that ain't easy. So social enterprise is a way for them to kind of use a bit of a revenue business model to help sustain them and to create a more self-sustaining type of structure and model for them, so they don't have to be so reliant on these grants or philanthropy type of funding, which is very, very difficult. That being said, and we can discuss this, it doesn't mean to say that they won't be still looking upon, grants and other types of revenue streams because it, social enterprises has its own challenges and it's hard too. So you kind of have to, I think, diversify as much as possible. I will add, and we'll get to this when we talk about definitions, but I will add that, and I know this is not the focus of our discussion, but for-profit social enterprises, which is something that I talk a lot about and write a lot about, has a bit of a different approach. And so they are fully, a for-profit business, but I still call them, not everyone does, and we can talk about that. I still call them a social enterprise, and because of their focus and mission and all that kind of stuff. So they might have a little bit more success in certain things than nonprofits and charities, but pros and cons, ups and downs. So it's like it's a very interesting field right now, and this space is fascinating to me, always has been, and it's ever evolving, and we can discuss that. I'm not sure if I answered all your questions just yet. As I mentioned, 5 hours, I was joking, but there is a lot to unpack in those questions. That's all I'm trying to express.
Well, I'm sure I could have asked the questions better, but I guess trying to understand social enterprise, particularly as it relates to, say, a nonprofit carrying it on or a charity carrying it on as one of their streams of revenue, where they're diversifying some of their structures. So I agree. There's the sort of the big social enterprise, which are always for profit but have a social mission, and those are distinct from the social enterprise divisions or other kinds of side businesses that some charities or nonprofits might be carrying on. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. It's just that I happen to focus a lot more these days on the for profit, just because I feel like there's more movement there. I'm just putting it out there, so it's just like a lot of some of my answers. I will continue to try to focus on the specific sector you're looking at. But I just to let you know that sometimes I talk more broadly. So when I speak about social entrepreneurship, I tend to look at it in a very broad level. So I talk about for profit, nonprofit, charity, but in one global scale because of there's just been movement all over the board. So yeah.
And what about impact investing? It's kind of a broad term as I understand it. I've been trying to get my head around impact investing because I'm told that, we think of investing in a for-profit organization. The whole point of it is to get revenue from that investment. But impact investing is kind of talking about something else, as I understand it, that's about investing in the actual impact that the organization makes. Am I correct in that? Is that what you understand it to be?
I mean, I just interviewed a few impact investors the other day. We could talk about them if you like. But there are more and more impact investors making their way in this space. It's about they're investors, pure, very strong focused investors. They believe, though, a lot of these organizations, ventures, what that are coming up in the world of social purpose. We use all kinds of words here. They believe there's a lot of potential for them to do well financially and socially, environmentally, whatever kind of social enterprise they are, social purpose business they are. It's not like they're saying we don't want to make any money here. We don't want it. Want our investments to go nowhere. That's not it at all. A lot of them believe that there is a financial model here for a lot of these ventures that they're investing in, and at the same time they want to make a difference. They want to be part of that difference making capacity, so they've put their money into these organizations, and there are more and more of them out there actually, which is really nice. It's something that in terms of an evolution, if you ask me how it's evolved over the years, when I've been writing about this for many years now, you do see a lot more of them coming up. Doesn't mean to say it's easy, for either side of it, people being invested into, and those investing. Like there's challenges, but you definitely see more and more people taking that chance and believing in the possibility. So, yeah.
Well, can you give us the big picture of where things are in the area of social enterprise and impact investing in Canada today? I wonder if you could turn your minds to what you've seen in this space in the nonprofit sector.
Here's the interesting thing about when people ask me, what's the landscape like now for? I'm going to focus right now on social enterprise in Canada. I was, I don't often do, start looking around at what's out there. I mean, I keep up to date as best as I can, but one of the reasons there's such divergent numbers and data and facts, and at the same time, very limited. It's one of the reasons why I've been trying to get a study that I'd like to commission a study myself to sort of get to the bottom of, if we can, of what's landscape. And I'll tell you, I read somewhere, for example, that there's 1,300 social enterprises in Canada. I read somewhere else that in Ontario alone, there's 10,000. Now, I don't know about you, but that's quite a difference in numbers. There's no question that there's been an evolution. There's an evolution in terms of how many people are interested in building social enterprises, and how many people are interested in supporting social enterprises, and how many people know more about social enterprise to some extent. And that's been great. And you see, like, for example, in Ontario, BC, other provinces as well, that there's been, more and more, the government is trying to put more focus on it. And there's more a policy orientation, a legislative orientation. However, we're still far from establishing some sort of legislative policy framework for social enterprise, which is part of the problem. The other part of the problem is that there's lack of one definition. So that might explain why the data is so divergent, depending on the couple of studies that and I wish that there were more studies. I would have, I was doing a lot of research before our phone call, just because our podcast, because, I was like, okay, where are we right now? I haven't looked at this number in a long time. And I'm like, okay, that's very different. And that was from a couple years ago, granted. And there's nothing from just last year. I did look at Canada. The government had some numbers out there. Again, a little bit over the map, and some of those were more focused on for profit. All that to say is, I don't know exactly where we stand today. And I'm just being honest, despite all the work I do, I'm still not exactly sure. I know that we're coming further ahead. We definitely are. And like I said, all those positive things I mentioned before, more and more people are trying to do it, more and more tools and resources, more and more supports. Impact investors have there's more of them around showing interest in investing in social entrepreneurship. So that's been positive. A lot of positive stuff. But I don't know exactly where we're at. And I also know that there's been a lot of challenges, especially during the pandemic. So some that may have started up before, and I know for a fact many of them are no longer around or are pivoted or have done different things, just like many other businesses. So, but social entrepreneurs face specific challenges, which we can talk about, that might have made it even harder the past few years. So positive energy, positive movement for sure, and more of a need. Like, I can see why nonprofits and charities are going to be doing more of this, not less. I definitely believe they'll be doing more of this because, when there is no other, or the revenue streams that they're typically reliant upon are drying up or lessening, they have no choice but to look to these types of, let's try a business, let's try a related business if we're a charity, and we'll try something that really helps support our mission and sell a service, sell a product. Let's do what we can. And that's basically where it comes from. And I think that's going to continue for sure.
Yeah, so it does seem that there's I mean, I think it's been the last 15 years where you started seeing things begin to change in Canada, and we lagged behind the US for sure in this area, I believe, and the UK. Is
Yeah,
that from the perspective of the legal capacity of having social enterprise companies? You've addressed this, but in the past 10 or 15 years, you've been covering this field and you've seen a pretty dramatic increase overall.
I have. But a bit, to be fair, I also cover stories in the US and UK and beyond. So, but I've seen a progression, globally, no question. So, and that's, for sure. I've seen a progression. Have I also seen a progression in the challenges they face and the competition they face? Yes. So I'm just being, fully, I think everyone needs to be honest about where we're at and the challenges we're facing, and your eyes have to be open. And we could talk about that. But those are all part of my like challenges, lessons learned, tips for others looking to do this, which I support fully. And I think it's wonderful. But yeah, evolution positive. Challenges, they're there. So yeah.
So I think I would love to talk about some of the things that you've learned in relation to social entrepreneurs that you covered in your book, "The Business of Change." Can you explain what social entrepreneurship is, and also give us some samples of those lessons that were learned that you think might be applicable for nonprofits and charities to think about as they begin to perhaps becoming more entrepreneurial and trying these new revenue streams and these different sort of alternative revenues.
There is, as we mentioned, differing definitions. So I don't want to state that this is everyone's definition. My definition that we use at Sea Change and that I use in my book, and that a lot of others have adopted throughout the world, is that it is a venture support, charity, nonprofit, or otherwise. But the primary reason it's there is to tackle a social or environmental challenge in society or in our world. And that is the primary purpose, and it has to be. And the reason I reiterate that is more because I they talk about for profit as well. So, I talk about all of them: for profit, nonprofit, charity. And they have to make sure that if you call a for profit a social enterprise, that you're referring to a venture that has their mandate is social, environmental first and foremost, financial secondary, tertiary. But yeah, so like so when it comes to nonprofit and charities, yeah, you're trying to establish a way to become more sustainable and perhaps less dependent on grants or other types of revenue streams that were not as, effective right now, or perhaps you just want to diversify. So it's a very simple thing. It's a business with a social and environmental mandate. Its purpose is to help you become more self-reliant and to take care of your needs and fulfill your mission. There's been a lot of lessons learned that I bring up in my book is based on organizations that have been able to make it work. And a few of the reasons they've been able to do that successfully. I mean, I sort of broke it down. I don't remember how many I have. It's been a year. But I just, there's a few of them. One of them is their ability to not only tell their story effectively, which is very important. So storytelling is 100% important. If they're not telling that story properly, it's going to be a hard battle. But it's not only telling that story, it's also being able to back it up with numbers and finances, financial, stability of some kind of your business model. Because if you're looking for others to support you or to buy into your mission, they're going to want to see that you're actually, a capable business, and that you know what you're talking about from a business side of things. And a lot of people from the nonprofit charitable sectors, they are very, they're so good-hearted and come in with this great purpose and great mission, and we love that, but they can't always back it up with a strong business model. And so that sometimes creates a lot of problems. They have to bring people on their team, which is what some of the folks that I've spoken to have done, if they don't have a business minded background or skill set. They bring people on their team, or they learn themselves some of the business skills and business savvy that they need, because you're effectively running a business. So there's no way around it. You have to understand it and you have to do that well. Um, I'll give you some examples in a second, but I think the other things that I've learned also is things like being able to measure that impact, because more and more people, and we are, even if we look at those impact investors, even though there are a few, but there are some that will come and say, yeah, I really believe in what you're doing. Let's invest in this project. Always possible in the sector. But they are definitely going to ask you, and so will foundations and anyone else who might want to support your work. Well, how do you measure your impact? Number one, how are you doing it? And let's see your impact. So you have to be able to say, we're being able to, achieve A, B, and C. Look how many folks we have brought out of poverty. Look how many people that we've given jobs to. Look how much work and our efforts have achieved in terms of environmental sustainability, those types of things. And so you have to show the numbers. It's not, and I think most charities and nonprofits know if they're going to apply for grants, they have to show that too. But this is like that extra step that they really have to ensure that they're meeting those needs. And you even think about, there is, I don't know if we want to get into this now, but there's something called social impact bonds, and there's community bonds. There's all these other, they're not as popular now, but it's basically the corporations, nonprofits, and government working together. It's more complicated than that, to invest in these projects, and that is happening as well. We didn't talk about that before because it's not as popular yet, but there have been a few pilot projects in Canada, and with charities and nonprofits. But that is a huge project, and that is a huge undertaking, and that involves definitive measurement of impact to the nth degree, because you are, really asking for an investment by government, by corporations, by nonprofits. So I mean, these are just the general things that come up a lot, is the importance of that. Also the importance, if let's say you're a nonprofit, and you're working in a community, it's vital, from what the people that I've spoken to really ask for in community engagement. And so it's not just to come into a community and say that, we know what your needs are, we know what your challenges are, we know how it's best. It's always bringing them into the conversation, bringing them into possibly the actual work and effort itself, so that they feel a level of engagement and of commitment from the community itself. So it has to be, and you can't just, there's also this thing about scaling up. Everyone's talking about, we need to get bigger and bigger, and we start, you start going into the communities, and you start going into other countries, and you start, like, we'll see that happening with social enterprises. Problem is that they also have to take into account the differences in community everywhere you're going, even in a different city in Canada, not beyond. There's always going to be different needs and different, nuances that you have to understand when you're when you're tackling, making these efforts, social entrepreneurial efforts in different communities. So those are some of the main lessons that I've learned that I've taken away from other folks who are doing this work. So, if you look at someone like Eva's Print Shop, I don't know if you know about Eva's Print Shop. They're part of an organization here in Toronto. They're basically a printing house, but their work supports their mission of supporting youth that they that they work with that stay in their homes, and that they help provide them with training, and they help provide them with homes. And this print shop gives them the jobs and the skills, and they found a way to really make this work over the years, and build it up in a smart way, to really tap into the need that's out there, and to really find a way to incorporate their mission with their business, and it's become a huge part of what they do. You can also look at Building Up, which is also a Toronto-based social enterprise. I don't know if you've heard about them, but they're based on a model called Build, which is out Western Canada. Their model is based on that. It's like they're creating opportunities for, again, it's for the youth who have facing some challenges in their lives, and it gives them skills and training in the trades in construction, and that's why it's called Building Up. But they are doing phenomenal work, and they have started a few years ago, and they're already getting all kinds of construction projects, and they can definitely show there's impact. They're measuring impact. They're helping people move, get skills and get jobs, and then they move on into the world of the construction, and they find more and more jobs there. So that's definitive impact, measured, witnessed. So it's like it's definitely happening. You have a bunch of organizations like that, and you have, I don't know, I can go on, but out, if you give an example, out in BC, Nicole Rycroft, her organization called Canopy. She's become, I mean, I remember when she was just starting out, I was covering her a long time ago, and she basically helps through a variety of initiatives, decrease our reliance on endangered forest, trees, and ancient and endangered forests. And so she's working with retailers, working with brands of all kinds, working with printers and publishers. She creates all kinds of strategy and initiatives to help them move on to a more sustainable way of creating their products, and that is not that is more sustainable for the environment, etc. She is doing tremendous trans work, and she definitely has a way of saying, this is what I've done. I've spoken to all these people. I've got them all to change their methods, their approach. They're creating more sustainable world for the rest of us, and thanks a lot to her work. And she's gone into the US and Europe. She's all over the place. So, I mean, I can go on with examples, but there are some folks who are doing such tremendous work. Furniture Bank, they're just doing so much work. I mean, helping not only helping people who are getting into housing have furniture in their home, but their social enterprise allows you to support their work, because by saying, okay, can you pick up my furniture and deliver it, or whatever, they charge a fee for it. It's a service. You're getting it out of your home, so you're happy to have it go, and you are basically helping homeless people get into homes much quicker, much more efficiently, much happier. They're just doing great work. So all these organizations really proud of the type of work that they're doing, and the impact that they're having.
So I guess the lessons learned, and also if I remember your points, telling their story effectively, what their mission is, having demonstrative evidence of what they're achieving in terms of impact that they're having, and engaging stakeholders from the communities that they're serving as part of the planning and the delivery of whatever business or service that they're providing. Is that correct?
Yes, and there was also that other one with the business, knowing their business and having a good, strong sense of business, or bringing someone on the team who does, because that's incredibly important too. Yeah.
I'm curious now, and I'd like you to take a sort of a bigger picture look here, and particularly looking at the Canadian picture. Do you feel that the We Charity scandal has had a chilling effect on organizations from considering these kinds of alternative revenue streams and operating models. Do you think it's impacted their willingness to try these things?
Had you asked me that a year ago, I would have said, yeah, for sure. But I think the way news cycles go, I don't even hear about them so much anymore. I think that if people were really caught up in We Charity and were very involved in them and they had donated and they had been a part of them in a more intricate, involved manner originally, I think it definitely would have given them, something to think about and something to be a little bit more cautious about moving forward. Personally, I did a lot of work. I was traveled with them in fairness, so I should mention that, to Kenya. And despite everything, what I would say is that I still think they did great work. So despite it all, there definitely were some issues, with governance and other things. There's no question there were issues that, should not have been there, should not have happened. But I do think overall they still, I saw some great work on the ground, and I spoke to some people who really appreciated their help and support. So I think the first thing I would say is that there's two ways of looking at it. The other thing that I would say is that there's a very complicated model. I think of the average social enterprise out there is not even a tenth as complicated, and it's much easier to see a transparent, measurement of impact, transparent, understanding of what they're about, what they're doing, where the money's going. I think if anything, social enterprises have learned even more how important it is to be transparent and to be open and to show on their website exactly where their money is coming, money is going, have to be available to talk to people. So, yeah, I think there is a more of a cautious approach for sure. But I also think people understand that, it's not the MeWe model was not a typical model. Like it was a very convoluted type of model, and that's not the average social enterprise in Canada. So hopefully that's not going to be much of a deterrent. And I would just add that the way media is and the way our life is these days, you hardly hear about them right now. So, that's the way news cycles work. Unfortunate as it is, or for whatever, however you want to determine that. But I'm just saying. So I think it's kind of we've moved on. Yeah.
Yeah, I think inevitably the kind of public scrutiny and lack of transparency that became quite obvious as the investigations were done. Do you think that they've had an impact on public's trust, for instance, in charities or nonprofits at large, especially ones that are running social enterprises?
For as much as people fully understood the story, and because I think a lot of people took different pieces from it, I'm not sure, because I would say yes. I think it definitely would have had an impact for sure on eroding slightly people's confidence. But like I said, I also think it's a very complicated model that they ran, and I think that, people, if they look onto other social enterprises and see how they work, as opposed to and compare them to the way, MeWe works, I think they would see that it's the much simpler approach and model can make all the difference in terms of being able to feel confident and, you know yeah, that your money is going to where it's supposed to be going. And you also learn, I think, these things don't necessarily turn people off as much as it does educates them. And when you become a more informed, person, you ask the right questions that you may not have asked, 5 years ago. So maybe it will make them a little bit more cautious, maybe, but I think they also now know they're armed with a greater knowledge of how social enterprises should work, and the types of things they should expect, to get in terms of answers, in terms of the questions, in terms of transparency, which may not have been part of the conversation as much as it should have been. A lot of us, we're oh, they're, and for me, the same. Like I was, when I saw everything on the ground, I didn't ask as many questions I probably should have in the long run. I do, as a journalist, you don't sometimes you get caught up in something too. Oh, this looks great, but you do learn a lot. Yeah, journalists, everyone, we all learn, and we all see, gee, like I didn't even, wow, okay. But I think that if anything, I would take more of that away, because I think there definitely might have been a a cautious first reckoning of the sector. And I think now we're past that. And I think people are now just more informed and can make the right question, ask the right questions, make the right decisions based on that greater knowledge. I definitely think it shook us. It shook the sector for sure.
Well, I'd like to turn now to taking a look at Canada broadly. Um, and I'm guessing that this has to do with provincial legislation associated with impact investing and social enterprise. But do you find that there's quite a bit of difference, regional differences in how social enterprise is embraced in Canada? For example, why it might be more common in some provinces than in others?
So I think, and it's a very, very good question. I actually think that where there is more movement in Canada, and I would, let's say, focus maybe on BC or Ontario, maybe as the stronger. I think there's a mix of things going on. Part of it is government support, but that took a long time. And even so, it's not as much as many social entrepreneurs and enterprises wish it was. Um, so yes, but there is like for example, in Ontario, we had a social enterprise strategy and a social enterprise fund that ended in 2021, and that came late in 2016 or 14. I'm not sure. So there was a lot of time before that even came around, and there was a lot of asking the government to get involved, and they were trying different things, but not exactly to the extent that we wanted them to. All that to say that I think it's partly government support, but I think a lot of it is community support. And I think it's some of the organizations in each of those provinces that are, have a mission focused on supporting social purpose, social enterprise. There's just a lot of organizations doing a lot of good work. And I would give them a little bit more credit, even though, the government is doing some things. But a lot of it, because it was late in coming and because of people have been waiting a long time, I think they're just organizations have sort of stepped up and done things like, in Ontario, there's Mars. And so, as an example, that does support a lot, does, all kinds of supportive. There's the B Corp, which is an organization that is worldwide, but there's a nice headquarters in Canada in Toronto. And that supports a lot of social enterprises as well. And there's, as far as impact investing, there is a greater, whether it's BC or Ontario, there's just a stronger movement altogether for that here too. So I don't know if I would necessarily point a finger at the government. I think they play a part, but I think also community. And I think we would have to just add to that a caveat that, just like I said at the top of the conversation, the social entrepreneurial landscape in Canada is a bit nebulous. We don't really know how much is going on because we don't have the exact facts and figures and numbers, and I wish we did, and that is something I'd like to work on. If anyone wants to work on that with me, is listening. But it is something that has to be done. But in other words, there might be a smaller province somewhere that has a tremendous amount of social enterprises that we don't even know about because either they don't define themselves that way, or it's just hasn't gotten into the media landscape. So we don't necessarily talk about them, but they're in their own small way. They're having an impact. It could be a cafe that hires only disadvantaged individuals or people with developmental disabilities, which you see coming up all across Canada, actually. But do we talk about them all the time? No, we don't. They're smaller, pockets. So it's a very difficult question to answer. And I'm sorry I don't have a definitive one for you because it is a bit gray. But yes, I definitely see a stronger presence in terms of support and networks and all that stuff in some of the, BC comes to mind and Ontario comes to mind. Doesn't mean to say it's not happening in the other places though. And it's not always necessarily government because even the government, legislatively and policy wise have sort of been behind the eighth ball on this one for whatever reason. There is now the social finance fund that the federal government has just come out with, and we'll see if that it takes us any further. But provincially, it's there's a little bit of attempts here and try to do this, then try to do that, and we still don't have a definition in place. We still don't have one sort of definition that covers everything all over in every province. Where we're kind of still nebulous in that way. So All of that to say, not a clean answer for you, but that's pretty much where I see it.
Well, it is interesting your point about there being so it's so difficult to measure because and I think your point as well in terms of having a clear definition of what social enterprise actually is that's universally accepted makes it really difficult for people to assess
Yeah.
um, just how developed it is within Canada. Um, but maybe you want tell me about what you're planning to do about changing that in terms of doing a study.
I am trying. I'm trying to initiate a Canada-wide study on social enterprise. Now, I don't know if I'll be a lot more successful, but I think I have certain folks to speak to in each province to get a better sense of where we're at. Still, with the understanding that I don't know if we'll ever be 100% sure of the numbers because, like I said, people either don't self identify as social enterprise, even though they are, or they may not be necessarily involved in a network that would hear about the study. But there hasn't been anything done lately. And I think there's been a lot of movement lately, and especially now with the new social finance fund, which is involved in this, there has been more movement for sure. And I give a lot of organizations their due for all the work that they've done to get us there. But I still think, just from my research recently, that we're lacking. So I am looking to establish, a nationwide study that not only measures, are we self-identifying, the people that should be social enterprise, are we actually catching everyone or most of the people? Can we all agree on some definitions of it? And what is your impact? Could we measure that? And let's get a sense. Because honestly, the studies that I've told you about before, they're all over the map in terms of how many people, so it's unfortunate, and I think we have to get a better sense of it.
What barriers do you see preventing organizations from getting started with social enterprise? What do you think should be changed to make it, I guess, easier or more attractive?
Some would say that there should be better legal structures accepting and appreciating what a social enterprise is, and tax reasons for other reasons. Like right now it's like, I keep using the word nebulous, but it is like, it's province to province. We have three different two provinces. BC has some kind of legislative understanding of a, now they have a benefit company. Before they had a community contribution company. Nova Scotia has something called the community interest company. No other provinces really have a set definition of how they fall into, policy and legislative definitions that can help them establish a social enterprise with some kind of structure. Whether it's tax related or otherwise. So I think that kind of structure would be very helpful, and I think that comes into play sometimes with social enterprises or people who want to start a social enterprise but don't have a structure and that can sort of guide them, or any kind of policy or legislative framework that can guide them in any way. And I think that makes it very, very difficult. But I think also, I think there needs to be, like I mentioned, in Ontario and BC, there is more. There's our initiatives and efforts underway that have been there for a while to support the tools, the resources, the mentorships, and I think there should be more of that in other provinces in Canada. I don't feel that everyone has the right support systems in place, which makes a huge difference because this is a big deal when you start a social enterprise. I think getting more and more impact investors interested in the nonprofit and charity sector, and working whether with community bonds or with actual, investment, getting more banks, if it's not an impact investor, that are open to and interested in putting, in giving money to these organizations who are willing to do really good work and make a big difference in community and can also show a return. So I think there has to be more of an acceptance overall that these organizations can not only make a social and environmental impact, but they can actually bring in revenue and can support, and they're hiring people, and they're doing all kinds of things that we should all be supporting in society and community. And whether it's, investors or banks or others, we should all see the value that they bring. And so there needs to be a little bit more, or a lot more of that, the support systems from all those levels. I think that would make a huge difference.
Well, Elisa, thank you very much for your insights and advice. I know that they'll be most helpful to nonprofits across Canada. That's certainly been helpful to me.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful speaking with you.